You're listening to Liberty USA, sponsored by County Citizens Defending Freedom. As an American, you have freedom flowing through your DNA, and we are here to help educate, empower, and encourage you to stand for your freedom.
Hello, County Citizens. Today we are with Congressman Byron Donald, who proudly serves Southwest Florida District 19. Byron, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's my pleasure to be with.
Now, when I think of Naples, I think of one place, and that is Seed to Table, and the amazing things that happen in that grocery store.
No, Seed to Table is awesome. You know, Alfie Oates, so he's the owner. Mm-hmm. This place opened up like right before COVID struck. And, at the early days of COVID, this is back when we were doing essential businesses and non-essential businesses. Because he was a supermarket, he was allowed to be open. But what he did is he built a second floor that, had a little stage, and you could order food, and there's like a bar in there. It just kind of became the place to go every day during COVID. It's really taken on a life of its own. So, salute to Alfie for his vision, and I think it's even done things he didn't expect it, but it's been a great part of Southwest Florida.
Mm-hmm. Owned by a former Patriot. Well, there's lots of topics that I want to dig into with you today, but I think the one that I want to address first is what happened in the Supreme Court with the leak of the draft. What's running through your mind with that scenario?
A couple things. First and foremost, I think when it comes to the Roe decision, and even the Casey decision, everybody basically agrees, even if you are, if you are a legal mind on the political left, even you acknowledge that Roe v. Wade is one of the worst written decisions by any iteration of the Supreme Court. The logic is faulty, the legal precedent is faulty. They essentially just created things out of thin air, piecing together the 4th, the 5th, the 14th. And it just throw together this essential right to privacy with respect to abortion. So that's number one. It was a bad decision anyway. I would say number two is that Sam Alito, and it looks to be what the majority of the court is saying, is that even though stare decisis exists, you have the ability to unwind previous precedents set by the Supreme Court. Look no further than Plessy versus Ferguson, which was undone by Brown versus Board of Education. So when the left is saying, "Oh, this is crazy," you can't undo Roe. That is not true. You can, and it's a faulty decision. To the leak itself, this is destructive of the very nature of the court, and it's also destructive of the country. Because what this leaker has done is basically put the majority on the court in the crosshairs in a political argument. They literally have politicized the court. And for all the people in my own party, like Susan Collins, who says she felt lied to by Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, let's be very clear that democratically appointed people to sit on the court, they've also not been truthful in their testimony. These Supreme Court nominations have become games because of what Joe Biden did to Robert Bork, somebody who had one of the highest pieces of legal intellect to ever sit on the court and one of the most ethical people. But he told the truth about how terrible the Roe decision was, and the Democrat majority railroaded Robert Bork so much they call it being Bork, essentially, where they railroad you because they disagree with you on one issue. So the Democrats have politicized the court for a long time. What this leak did is it supercharged it because they've created a political fight over a simple constitutional question, which is basically, does the federal government or does the Supreme Court have the ability to write the law of the land? They don't. They should have done it with Roe. What'll happen is it'll actually be the 50 states will all have their own rules, which might be the most acceptable thing for the republic. And those aren't even my words. That's Ruth Bader Ginsburg's words when she was asked about the same question. But the leak itself is disastrous for the country and the court.
Do you think this will affect the outcome?
I don't think so. I think what's going to happen is I think the justices who apparently are in the majority are going to hold firm, because if you read the Alito decision, it is actually quite logical and sound, regardless if you agree or disagree with abortion. It's a sound legal argument. And I think they'll hold firm.
Mm-hmm. I just can't help but think that this is another pawn used for getting donations and more people on their side for the midterms coming up. Speaking of pawns being used by the left, would you agree that racism is one that has been used?
Oh, all the time. Race right now in our politics is probably one of the biggest areas where, unfortunately, Black voters are being gaslit by Democrats all the time. And it's really sad to see. Look no further than when the Democrats tried to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. What the left will never tell Black voters is that the 1965 Voting Rights Act is still the law of the land today, except for one provision, which is the pre-clearance provision. The pre-clearance provision was something where a jurisdiction who had a systematic history of discriminating against Black voters had to take any changes to the voting rights section of the Department of Justice. And that made sense at the time. What the John Lewis Voting Rights Act does, it makes every voting jurisdiction in the United States a pre-clearance jurisdiction. So if any state makes a change, they have to get it approved by the voting rights section of the Department of Justice, which is, in my view, a violation of the Constitution of the United States, but that's where they want to go. If you oppose that bill on those grounds, like I just said, they say you're trying to take away the votes from Black people. So like I said, it's just gaslighting from the left. They do it all the time, mostly with voting, also with police, but it's mostly with voting.
Mm-hmm. I saw this question on Twitter that I wanted to ask you about, and the question is, do Black Republicans reflect Black voters' concerns? The argument is that Black conservative politicians make white people comfortable enough, but do not speak for the majority of Black people.
I don't agree with that. I think that if you look at the prescriptions of Black Republicans, what we talk about is educational opportunities for all people, specifically poor people in our country, who typically still tend to be Black and of Latin American descent. So we talk about that. We talk about actually healthcare reform, which would lower deductibles and lower insurance premiums, things that actually help the working poor, people who are trying to go up the economic ladder in our country. What we talk about is a robust economy. So there's multiple access for success in the United States. What we talk about is not sending everybody to college so that you don't have young Black kids being, basically seeing the only pathway to success is going to a 4-year institution, getting a bad degree, and having student loan debt as a result. So I think that Black Republicans, we talk about things that would actually help the Black community overall. The problem is that there's a distrust of Republicans in the Black community. And I think part of that is, like we just discussed, is the gaslighting from the political left to Black voters. But then it's also the fact that Republicans have just not done a good job at all in the last 60 years in the United States of actually spending time trying to talk to Black voters, engage Black voters, cultivate Black voters, and gaining political relationships with Black voters.
Mm-hmm. Do you think organizations such as Black Lives Matter bring justice to the civil rights movement?
No, I don't. I think Black Lives Matter Inc. was actually a real setback for Black people overall. I mean, look, they've received about, it was like $90 billion in contributions. Nobody really knows where the money is. They've been shut down from actually being
except in that
nonprofit.
$6 million house.
Oh yeah, we know this about the $6 million house, mm-hmm. but it's really been atrocious what's happened with that organization. What most people don't know is that you have the local Black Lives Matter affiliates have been suing the national Black Lives Matter affiliate because they feel that, the national group was raising money on the backs of the situations that was happening in these communities. I think that the civil rights movement is something in our country which was definitely needed, sorely needed. It really helped to level the playing field for Black people in the United States. And that work has continued since the civil rights movement. I think what Black Lives Matter Inc., now we use it as differentiate too, what BLM Inc. did is that they literally tried to capture money, frankly, on corporate guilt, on white guilt. And then they just didn't use the money for the things they actually advocated for. I think if you were going to talk about the idea of Black Lives Matter, of course, everybody believes that Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. But the institution itself is a Marxist institution. And obviously they took the money and they ran. And it doesn't look like anybody's going to be held accountable.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever get any pushback for speaking out against Black Lives Matter?
Sometimes, but I mean, I don't really spend a lot of time talking about them because what I'm more focused on is what are the policies and the ideas that I believe are actually going to help people in the Black community and, frankly, in any community. I think we're at a point in American history now where it's really about socioeconomic status, not really the color of your skin. You can have a Black kid who has two parents at home growing up in a middle class household or an upper middle class household. That Black child's experience is very different than a white kid who's grown up with one mother very, very poor. Different experiences, different exposure levels. And so I think that we're at a point right now where it's about socioeconomics, not so much about race anymore.
What organizations do you support in fighting and helping Black and minority communities?
Oof, that's a good question. I think honestly, the number one is the church. Local churches still have a big part to play in all of this. That's where a lot of the leaders in our communities are. Pastors and reverends obviously they care about their parishioners. They're on the front lines trying to address a lot of these needs. I think that charter school organizations, school choice organizations, they've also been on the front lines trying to give young Black kids a different opportunity to get educated. I think of KIP. KIP was one of the oldest ones in the country that's been focused on that. I think, then also you have different groups. You have the United Negro College Fund. They do good work sometimes. I think it's a thing where we get so caught up into the different groups per se, not understanding that even in some groups that we might disagree with politically, they actually really try to do really good things on behalf of Black children in the United States. I think what we have to do is get away from some of the partisanship around what are Black ideas or what are Black policies and get to the politics of what are going to be the policies that unleash people to be successful in the country.
Mm-hmm. Switching to the border, CCDF is in Texas and expanding, but you and I both know how important Texas is in the next election. We've got to close our borders. In a tweet recently, you said the border is so overrun that a National Guardsman died saving the lives of illegal immigrants. The White House refuses to take responsibility. Biden hasn't even visited the border. Why do you think that is?
Well, he doesn't want to he doesn't want to visit the border because then he's got to answer questions about it. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden has basically destroyed border integrity that we had under Donald Trump. So if he goes down, he legitimizes frankly, I believe his biggest failure as commander in chief. And that says a lot considering inflation, Afghanistan, and everything else. But I think the border's been his biggest failure overall. He has to acknowledge it. That's why he doesn't go.
Mm-hmm. Do you think our current administration is looking out for us economically?
No, I think the current administration is fixated on their agenda, whether it be economic or political, regardless of the facts on the ground. Listen, we have in the president's budget, he has massive tax increases on oil and natural gas. And so when I asked the head of the Office of Management and Budget during a budget committee hearing, I asked him, I said, do you think these increases are actually going to help or hurt working families and seniors on fixed income? And their answer is no, we think it's going to help them and all Americans because we have to get off of fossil fuels. I was like, that's not even an answer. It's going to raise prices on people who are struggling right now. Do you think that's in their best interest? And they're committed to the agenda. It's very, very sad.
Mm-hmm. And I thought it was pretty tasteless jokes at the White House Correspondent Dinner when Trevor Noah made a joke at Biden that said everything's looking up since you've come into office. Gas is up, rent is up, food is up. And it showed Biden laughing back in his chair, clapping. And the American people that are suffering due to the levels of inflation are not laying back clapping anymore.
No, they're not. And I think that it's important for the American people to understand that the political elites who definitely are on the Democrat side, they have no problem going to their galas, whether it's the White House Correspondents' Dinner or the Met Gala. They don't mind going to the French Laundry in San Francisco and sipping lattes and having caviar. They'll do all that while you suffer and while you struggle in this economy. And they have no ideas to help. And I think stuff like that, I saw the clip. I wasn't at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I saw the clip and I was just like, things are not well in the United States and you're sitting here yucking it up in a tuxedo. I thought it was wrong.
He also made a comment about how the Biden administration did not have well thought out evacuation plans. And again, I thought that was very tasteless because the 13 lives that we lost in Afghanistan due to Biden not having a properly thought out evacuation plan is not to be made out as a joke.
Listen, the only joke about what happened is Joe Biden's leadership. And unfortunately, his joke of a leadership led to the death of Americans, not just our servicemen and women, but people who have been trapped by the Taliban in Afghanistan. It is outrageous. But at the time when it was leading up to the exit from Afghanistan, we were telling the administration, you should not leave. There are real issues there. There are commitments that the Taliban has to make under the deal. And they try to blame it on the deal that Donald Trump negotiated. But there were conditions under that deal that the Taliban never met. And even if you talk to Trump officials who were there towards the end of the Trump administration, they will tell you that Donald Trump would have not executed the final withdrawal from Afghanistan because the preconditions he set in place with the Taliban weren't met. It's just that simple. But Joe Biden has always wanted to be out of Afghanistan, regardless of the cost. And unfortunately, it has cost us 13 men and women. And I want people to remember when those caskets were coming back and Joe Biden was having to sit there and receive the caskets of our dead men and women and actually engage the families, he was busy checking his watch and talking about Beau Biden as opposed to dealing with the grief of the families who have been left behind in the wake of his disastrous leadership.
Now, segueing to a different topic, what are your thoughts on big corporations funding nonprofits that directly influence local society, such as Bloomberg?
Listen, when it comes to corporations funding organizations, I'm a believer in diversity. I think if a company wants to spend their money in political activity, that's fine. Where I stop is when you have corporations who are funding electioneering efforts, something like literally like the Zuckerbucks that happened in some key areas in the last election. I think that when you have these electioneering organizations, the dark money that the left loves talking about, there was the New York Times article, so this is not conservative talking points. This is the New York Times. This is one of their papers that basically said that the dark money on the Democrat side of the aisle is 3 times that on the Republican side of the aisle. Folks, you have these corporations, you have these billionaires who are funding all these different organizations around the actual process of elections. Not political activity, not speech in our politics, which, as far as I'm concerned, I think is something that should be very robust. We should have massive debate. People should be free to engage in the politics of our country. But the electioneering, that can't happen.
Mm-hmm. Which I'd also like to add that these corporations are ones that are funding school books and curriculums, and that's why a lot of times we're seeing this indoctrination happen in the schools. What do you have to say about the LGBTQ agenda and grooming and the sexual orientation, critical race theory all being in the school system now?
Well, I think this is where state governments have a responsibility to make sure that this kind of indoctrination doesn't end up in textbooks. In Florida, we just got rid of a bunch of textbooks because they had critical race theory all through the books. And so why is it that, and again, for people that don't follow this, they hear the talk from the political left. We had a K-5 textbook adoption for mathematics. And you have tables talking about the racism indexes of different political viewpoints. And that was the basis for doing a math problem. In the 4th grade or 5th grade, like, why would you inject something like that into a child's textbook? I think what is incumbent is that citizens need to take a far more detailed approach about reviewing curriculum, reviewing classroom material that ends up in front of our kids. Because you do have some of these publishers who subscribe to these ideas. And as far as they're concerned, there's no big deal about putting this stuff in textbooks unless citizens object and they go to school board meetings and they tell their school board members and the administration, their State Department of Education, that this stuff does not belong in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Well, Byron, thank you so much for being here with me today. And listeners, thank you for listening to Liberty USA. Remember, freedom runs in your DNA. Thank you for tuning in to Liberty USA, sponsored by County Citizens Defending Freedom. Give us a like or drop a comment, follow us on social media, and share with your friends. If you liked what you heard, support our mission in empowering American citizens to defend their freedoms and liberty at the local level. Learn more and fund your freedom today by donating at ccdfusa.com. Remember, freedom is in your DNA.